This is Justin Lanero from the Disturbing the Peace podcast, and you are listening to Pop Goes Your World.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 132, Coming to America Movie Review. Hey, I'm Chris McBrien, that's Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. You'll find us at popgoesyourworld.com. All of our contact information's on our website, and if you're on Twitter, at Amaron_DM is Derek, and at C McBrien is me. Derek, what's new in the world of pop culture for you, my friend?
Chris, well, I haven't really had a chance to take in anything brand new.
Okay.
Obviously, there hasn't really been a lot of stuff out that's brand new. So I've had a chance to see a few, we'll call them recent things that have started to make their way onto TV and streaming services. I had a chance just actually today to watch a documentary. You know me, I love me a good documentary. Do you remember a little over 10 years ago, there was a documentary called Super Size Me about a guy who ate nothing but McDonald's?
Yeah, it was Morgan Spurlock. I bring it up in
Yes.
class a lot, all the time. It was like in 2006 and almost took down McDonald's. I mean, it actually forced them to relook at their whole supersized campaign.
Absolutely. And a lot of changes were implemented either directly or indirectly because of that movie. A lot of changes for the better. I mean, there's still things that they could change, but hey, that's beside the point. But anyway, I was looking up Morgan Spurlock on the IMDb, and I was surprised. I've seen like 5 or 6 of his movies, which doesn't surprise me because I like documentaries and doesn't surprise me because I like his work. But I hadn't really realized I had seen that many of his things. Anyway, we're flipping through the other day, and he's got a sequel to that movie called Super Size Me 2. Holy chicken. And the premise of this one, he talks right at the beginning. He goes, I wanted to come back and revisit the fast food world. It's been over a decade since the last movie, but he goes, I didn't want to just go back to the same gimmick of let's just eat it for a month and see what's what. Because he's like, there's a lot of changes in fast food. It seems to be becoming healthier, quote unquote healthier. So he decides that he's going to open his own fast food restaurant. But he's going to study the science around what makes a fast food restaurant successful. And so he uses that sort of investigative journalism sort of style that he has with his documentary, where he just gathers all the information. He goes to food people, he goes to restaurant people, he goes to marketing people, he goes to focus groups, he goes to the man on the street, and he just compiles all of this fascinating information. And then he decides that, like, the movie's called Holy Chicken, so he decides he's going to open a fast food chicken restaurant. And then he just starts to dive into all of the behind the scenes stuff about what he calls big chicken. He goes, they have big tobacco and big oil. He goes, believe it or not, there's a thing called big chicken, and they run like 99% of all the chicken in America. And again, if you like documentaries and you like what you've seen with his work before, it was fascinating. And I really enjoyed it. It was quite good. Wow. I would encourage you to check it out if you can find it. Super Size Me 2 Holy Chicken.
I didn't even know it existed, so I was glad you mentioned it. Yeah, that's really cool.
And then another one that I watched is a little bit older. I was just, when my wife and I watched it, I said to her, I go, hey, this is maybe one that I'll recommend that Chris and I watch on a future podcast. And she turns to me and in a total straight face says, Chris will hate this. Don't recommend this.
It's because I hate everything, right?
Yeah. So the movie is called Waiting. You ever heard of it? Hear of it?
I've heard of it. So if I know, from what I know about it, is it Ryan Reynolds, the Canadian actor that's in it? And it's about waiters and waitresses or something, right?
It's Ryan Reynolds, Anna Faris, oh my God, Justin Long, Chai McBride, Luis Guzman. It's got like a lot of people in it where you're like, you may not know their names right away, but as soon as you see them, you're like, oh yeah, that guy. They have small parts. And it's just, think of it's basically a day in the life as a guy starts his first day to work in a restaurant. Like think of it like a Kelsey's or Chili's or something like that, like a chain restaurant. And then it's all the wacky and zany characters that work there. And it's just this comedy that comes together as all their lives sort of unfold in one day. It reminded me in a way of a movie like Clerks, where it's just one day in the life of the guys at the convenience store. And having worked in retail, although having never worked at a restaurant, I found a lot of it hit pretty close to home. Now, my wife did work in a restaurant for years while she was in high school, and she said like it was very, very close to the kinds of things that happened when she worked in a restaurant. So it made us laugh a lot. And so I thought, well, I know you used to work at the Chuck E. Cheese, right? So I was like, well, maybe Chris could find some humor in this because he used to work in the food services. But I don't know. I don't think I'm going to recommend it. I don't think you're going to like it.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to think about it for an upcoming show. If you nominate it, I'll watch it, and I'll certainly give you my 2 cents worth. But your wife's probably right.
Yeah, those are the two highlights from my week.
One thing I want to mention. I've been going through a bit of a personal transition. Okay. So as you know, and I'm very honest about everything in my life when I come on here, is I have 2 young kids, 7 and 10 years old. And the thing is, I used to be the funniest guy in the world to them. Like, I would make jokes and they would laugh and laugh and laugh. And they always thought Daddy was the funniest guy ever. But if there's any parents that are listening to the podcast, you know it. At some point, you go through a transition where you're no longer the funny guy. You're now cringy. So my kids used to always call me the GOAT. The greatest of all time. They said, Daddy, you're the GOAT. You're the greatest of all time. It was really nice. Well, it's transition now. I'm now the COAT, as they call me, which is the cringiest of all time. So apparently my jokes have gone from being funny to being cringy. And apparently I am now in the dad joke era. And this all kind of started a little while ago. And I touched base on this, I think, in a previous podcast, but I just wanted to bring it up that my oldest son is in the Cubs, like the Cub Scouts,
Cub Scouts. Yep.
And so one of the things they had to do a little while ago, a couple months ago, was they had to do, were you ever in the Cubs, by the way?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, you were. So you're going to understand.
Beavers, Cubs, Boy Scouts. Yeah, I was in.
Oh, you'll know where I'm going with this. So I never was. I think I went to when I was maybe 7 or something like that, or 8. I remember a friend took me to a Cub Scout meeting and I didn't like it and I never went back. So anyway, my son's in the Cubs, loves it. He started in Beavers, worked his way up, whatever, loves it. So one of the things they have to do is a Cub car. You get this little block of wood.
Yep.
And then you have to carve it and then put the wheels on and do everything. So my son makes it, and he insisted on doing a lot of the work himself, which is the way it's supposed to be. The dads aren't supposed to do the work. So he wanted to do all the work. Okay, no problem. So he did this thing and it looked like a jalopy. So anyway, when he gets done, he was really disappointed because he was saying like, Daddy, it's so slow. My car's the slowest of everyone's car. It's like a snail. It's just a snail. I should just call it a snail. And he was really upset. So I said, here's what you need to do. You need to paint a big red S on the one side and then put a big red S on the top and another big red S on the other side. And he's like, well, why did I do that? I said, well, you said it's a snail, right? This way, when it goes down the ramp, everyone will say, look at that S car go.
Boom.
And he's like, Daddy, you are the cringiest joke teller of all time. That's it. And that was the transition, I think, because he keeps referring to that. So now apparently I'm just the dad joke guy. I'm not the funny guy anymore. I am now the COAT. Ugh.
You're not even original, man. You stole that joke from Trading Places.
Of course I did. It's an Eddie Murphy movie. And speaking of which, let's get on to another one of his. I'm your head counselor.
I did not enjoy this anymore the second time.
What's going on? What's wrong?
Never seen it.
Oh,
Never
wow.
interested in seeing it. No desire to see it. Was not interested at all.
Oh, I paid $200 for these shoes, but I mean, I'm the best.
It's certainly tame by today's standards.
There's a very fat pair of pants hanging from the flagpole this morning.
It is not something I think I ever need to see again.
Oh!
Matt Damon.
Okay, so we mentioned Trading Places just a second ago, and I nominated Coming to America from 1988 for this week's show. One of the things I absolutely love about doing this podcast is the fact that I get to nominate a lot of these Gen X movies that I haven't seen in a long time. I love them. I had loved them, 30 years ago, but I haven't had a chance to watch them in so long. So this podcast allows me to go back and watch a lot of these movies that I liked, a long time ago, to kind of look at them from a different lens now. How do they hold up? All that kind of stuff. So I nominated Coming to America. We're going to get into this a bit. I believe it was the last sort of great sort of comedy movie from the 70s and 80s. This was a transition in a lot of ways, and we'll get into that in a bit. But I wanted to have you start us off and let me know. You obviously went back and watched the movie. You had seen it before that.
Yes, I had.
Right, so it wasn't a first time thing for you this week, so that's good. You had already seen it once, but you had to go back and watch the movie. What was your impression of going back and watching this movie? How many years later? 30 plus years later. What was your impression of watching it?
Well, I liked it. I mean, I remember seeing this movie for the first time in the theater. I would have probably been 13 or 14 years old. I remember going to see it with my friends. I remember enjoying it as a young person. I remember seeing it again on video, not long after. Like, usually it came out on video like about a year later, so I probably saw it the next year. I can remember this eventually coming on TV or one of the movie channels and probably recording it onto video cassette. So like when I was young, I saw this movie a lot. I was a big fan of Eddie Murphy, so I had a lot of his movies on video cassette. Then I had seen it, I would say in the last 20 years, I'd probably only seen it once. So there are a lot of viewings as a younger person, not nearly as many viewings now that I'm a little bit older. So when you suggested this movie, I thought, okay, good. It'll give me a chance to go back and watch it with sort of today's lens, as we do with some of these older movies, and see what holds up and what doesn't, and if the jokes still land. Now, part of the thing with comedy is if you know the punchline, the joke isn't usually anywhere near as funny. And unfortunately, with some of these classic comedy movies, that's just the way it is. Some of the jokes are not going to be nearly as funny now as they were the very first time, and that's just the nature of comedy. But no, I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say that I absolutely loved it. I don't think it's Eddie Murphy's best movie. It's certainly a good movie, but certain things I liked, certain things I didn't. What really struck me was some of the parallels to some other movies. So it reminded me very much of Trading Places, which we just talked about a second ago. But we reviewed that one, 3 or 4 months ago? We did Trading Places, which again I hadn't seen in a long time.
Yep, same star, same director, right?
Yeah, so it's like I could instantly see some of the parallels of that, where you have someone of privilege who is put in a position where they don't have that privilege anymore. Obviously, the reasons for that change are different in the two movies. It's an examination of class and wealth. So there's that parallel as well. You got the same director, obviously, and so as I'm watching Coming to America, I kept thinking back to Trading Places and sort of going, oh, well, this is sort of similar. This is sort of similar. Not that I felt that was a bad thing, but it was just interesting to see. But and of course, cameos, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, a little bit later.
Oh, for sure.
One of the things that I did really like about it that hadn't really stood out to me before, but I'm obviously more sensitive to it now, is just the whole idea that the people of wealth and power, like this is a movie where everyone in the cast is black. It's not a movie about white versus black. It's just you've got the people of wealth and the people who don't have wealth are all the same. You're not making that judgment about race. It's a comment on class. It's not a comment on color. But I guess in a way it is.
That's a good point. Whereas Trading Places had that element in it, right?
It did.
Good point. Yeah. Good point.
So again, that sort of I was more aware of that. Again, as a white guy, you're not usually aware of these things, but I've had time to learn how to be more aware of this kind of thing. So it was definitely a positive to see that you had Eddie Murphy's character came from a country that was wealthy, where you had the people in power were black people, were the king and the queen, and they had all the money, and that was something that you didn't see very often in the 80s, that's for sure. And hey, you don't even really see it that much now. But one of the things that it did remind me of, sort of the other way around, is a movie like Black Panther, the Marvel's comics movie. Now, I know you haven't seen many of the Marvel movies, but have you happened to see Black Panther, Chris?
No, I have not.
So, without ruining too much of it, the idea with Black Panther is that there's this country in Africa that is the most rich and technologically advanced country in the world, and they have been for a century. It's not called
Zamunda, is it?
No, it's called Wakanda.
Okay.
And it was created in the 60s or 70s by the people at Marvel Comics. So if anything, this borrowed from that rather than that borrowed from this. But again, when I'm watching this, I'm watching it through today's lens. And with Marvel comic movies being such a big deal, that was immediately where my mind went, is this is almost like a precursor to what we saw in the Black Panther movies, where you have this very rich, very advanced culture that then comes to the U.S. and looks at them as being backwards. And, you definitely have some of that commentary going on here at the beginning of the movie. Things like when he picks up the broken glass and he's like, what a great country. You can just throw glass on the street. And it's like just this total misconception of why things are the way they are and not realizing or not immediately understanding why something is different. So anyway, I've been rambling about a few things. I'm sure you've got a lot to unpack with that. So why don't you jump in?
For sure. So I hadn't seen the movie in, a long time, right? It's been years and years and years since I saw this. So the movie opens up and I'm immediately just taken back to this movie because if you remember when we first met, around the early to mid 90s when we first met, the crew that I hung out with when we were all working at Ontario Place, we watched this movie over and over and over again. And we used to quote it in a lot of the things we did on stage and stuff like that. But so watching it again just really took me back to that. But I love how it opens up with the Paramount logo and then it fades to the mountain.
Yes.
Not the first time that's been done. Raiders of the Lost Ark as well. But in this one, it was interesting because then it goes over the mountain and it kind of goes down into the jungles and stuff. And that opening sequence with all the dancing in the palace of Zamunda was choreographed by Paula Abdul. And she was a Laker girl at the time, but she'd done some choreography for Janet Jackson. So John Landis wanted her for this. And the thing was, she knew nothing about African dance. But she did what any good professional would do in that situation, and she lied. And she said, oh, of course I know how to choreograph African dancing, and she just proceeded to figure it out as she went along. Sometimes you just got to take a risk, and take the plunge, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, John Landis and Eddie Murphy, we mentioned they obviously worked together in Trading Places 5 years before this in '83, but they really feuded when they were making this movie.
Really? I didn't know that.
Big time. So when they worked together on Trading Places, Eddie Murphy was very young. He was new to Hollywood, and he was this incredible talent, obviously. And Landis really enjoyed working with him. But when they came back together to work on this and Coming to America, Landis had said that Murphy had basically turned into this egomaniacal mess. Like he had this entourage. He was rude. He was demanding on set. Now, Landis got the performance he wanted out of him, but Eddie Murphy was just a total a-hole, apparently. But anyway, the opening scene, for me, and watching it again, it played on a couple of different levels. Because not only was Akeem a prince who was completely pampered, the other level it worked on, maybe inadvertently, maybe not, I don't know. But Murphy himself had become at this point, at least in his own mind, he was Hollywood royalty. And he deserved to be treated like a prince, right? He had this entourage, like I said, and he was demanding the star treatment from the cast and the crew and the director. So the fact that the movie opens up with him getting lavishly treated, it really works well. Look at the rose petals. The musicians wake him up in the morning. Remember, someone brushes his teeth and rubs his neck to gargle.
Yeah.
And I thought it was funny. I got a laugh right away when he's complaining to his dad. And he mentions the pampering and the attention and the bathing. Actually, I quite like the bathing. That made me laugh. And then I guess it's like his assistant sings the Queen to Be song.
Yeah.
So I'm watching this movie with my wife, and the guy starts singing, you're my queen to be. And my wife just looks at me sideways. And I'm thinking, oh, this isn't going to go well. But then Eddie Murphy gives a line, and I just laugh because he goes, I want a woman who will arouse my intellect as well as my loins. And it made me laugh. I don't know why that did. And then he gets his bride to bark like a dog, and Murphy breaks the fourth wall and he looks at the camera. And
I didn't catch that. Yeah.
And I thought, that was interesting. So anyway, so we know what happens. Him and Semi take the Concorde jet to the United States, and he lands, they decide they're going to go to Queens, right? And the cabbie says to him, you dumb. And they get in, and then Eddie Murphy turns to Semi and says, well, what does dumb mean?
Yeah.
And this line actually struck me as being really, really important. And I never picked up on it when I first watched it. Because up until this point, Eddie Murphy was known for
profanity,
really crude language. Absolutely.
Yes,
in his stand-up and in his movies.
Yes.
Like he said the F word 223 times in the movie Raw. But in Coming to
Sounds about right.
Yeah, in Coming to America, this is a script where he's a likable, and toned down character. And that's why I think the whole reason why they added those characters in the barbershop was to kind of offset the lead character of Akeem's likability with more of an edge, since that's what Eddie Murphy's fans had come to expect from the movies. The thing is, too, is that this film changed Murphy's career in a couple of different ways. Number one, he, after this, then started playing multiple characters in movies like The Nutty Professor. And also, it changed him into more of an actor that starred in like more family-friendly movies, like Dr. Dolittle, Daddy Daycare, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know? So speaking of which, by the way, so this was the first movie where Eddie Murphy played multiple characters, because he's Prince Akeem and he's Clarence, the owner of the barbershop, you know, and then Saul, that older Jewish gentleman, was so funny, and Randy Watson from Sexual Chocolate. So this kind of launched him into making movies like The Nutty Professor with Hercules, and all that. And the old Jewish guy, Saul, is one of my favorite characters in the movie. And it reminded me that Eddie Murphy had done a sketch in 1984 on SNL called White Like Me. Have you ever heard of it? Ever seen it?
Is that the one where he pretends to be a white guy and he goes into the bank and he goes on the bus and all that? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I have seen it.
So it struck me that this was similar to that, because he was black and he was done up as a white guy. And apparently, rumor has it, he would walk around the set and he would walk around the Paramount backlot in his makeup as Saul. And he would even use his Eddie Murphy voice, and people didn't believe it was him. Because it didn't look like him, right?
Nice.
But I love the scene when they go into Queens. And again, there was multiple times I laughed a lot watching this again. Everybody steals their luggage off the front stoop when they go into the apartment. People just start stealing the luggage. And then the guy's showing them around the apartment. And he shows them the bathroom, and he's like, it's got a little bit of an insect problem. But you boys from Africa, you're used to that. I just laughed at that line. And that was the guy that played that landlord was Frankie Faison. And I don't know if you remember when we went back and reviewed Do the Right Thing, he was in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was like one of the old guys on the corner that would drink beer and criticize the Asians.
Yeah, he's done lots of movies.
He was in The Good Wife, too. You liked that show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. But then he's showing the apartment. The apartment's got like a chalk outline of a blind guy and his seeing eye dog and his cane. And there's like rats running
Shame what they
across
did to that dog.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I was laughing the whole time at this. And then Eddie, he goes out on the balcony and he yells, "Good morning," to his neighbors.
Yeah.
And they yell back the profanities at him. Yeah. And he naively yells the profanities back. But again, it plays up the innocence of his character. And the thing is, if you go back to the scene in the cab when he says, what does that word mean?
Yeah.
If you think about that, the way he delivers that line is completely out of character with Akeem in the rest of the movie. Because Akeem is he's very regal and he speaks well. He's intelligent. He quotes Nietzsche.
Yeah, I was going to say, they make a comment about how he's educated
but in that scene, he's like, what does this mean? Like, it's like he's almost like dumb or innocent, right? Mm-hmm. Because they need to set up that character as being likable and innocent, in some way.
Yeah.
But still allow him to use the profanity, which was the neat thing when he goes out on the balcony and he gets to yell the profanity,
Yeah.
But in an innocent way. So Eddie Murphy's fans are getting what they want in a way, kind of indirectly. And then I just love when they walk out in the street and Semi's like, I'm beginning to suspect that these are the people that stole our luggage. And there's
they're
a
wearing
kid,
like the animal skins and the guy tries to sell them the gold toothbrushes.
Yeah, it's got the toothbrush and the gold hair dryer. Hey, check this out. You got to buy it. The kid's on the skateboard with like a neck full of gold. It's so funny. So the scene I think we need to talk about because it's just so great. There's two scenes I want to talk about right now. One is when they go into Mighty Sharp, the barbershop.
The barbershop, yep.
Oh, God. Like, so you hadn't seen it in a long time. Did it hold up? Did you laugh at all? I mean, like you said, you made a good point. Like, you've seen it. Once you've seen the movie once, it's hard to, you don't get that surprise of the jokes and stuff like that. But I still laughed at this scene a lot. Yeah, I'm surprised how much I laughed at it.
Yeah, it's good. Don't get me wrong. Like, I enjoyed the movie and it was funny. I enjoyed these scenes. I didn't necessarily feel that you needed these characters in the movie as much as they appeared. It seemed to me almost like, well, if we're going to put them in all this makeup, let's give them a few scenes. Plus the actors, like you said, if Eddie Murphy's running the show, he probably wanted to do it as much as anyone else. So he's like, well, let's give these guys another little scene. Let's give these guys. There's even that scene in the end credits, like the cutaway scene halfway through the credits, where it's him as the old Jewish man telling the joke. It's almost like, he's like, well, you've got the makeup and I'm here and let's do another scene. So it's just
like I say, I think it was to give the movie more of an edge.
And maybe I had never thought of that, but
because they drop profanities, they're
sure,
you're using racial slurs and things like that.
Now, let me ask you this: I noticed something new that I hadn't noticed in previous viewings. Did you recognize the young kid who was getting his haircut when they came in the first time?
I did this time. I never did the first time I watched it, because the first time I watched it, or when I used to watch this movie a lot back in the 90s, who the hell is Cuba Gooding Jr.? Don't know who he is, right? But yeah, there he is, and totally recognizable. He looks like he's about 15 or something like that. But yeah, absolutely was him.
Yeah, I was surprised. Again, it just goes to the list of cameos of all the people that have small parts in this movie, and him being one of the ones that has a little guest spot right away, right at the beginning. But yeah, I mean, the scene in the barbershop was certainly entertaining, and again, it's interesting given that it was made in the 80s, where they made use of some of the old classic camera tricks where you can have Eddie Murphy playing 2 or even 3 roles in the same scene. And just by the way you position the camera or cut the scenes together, you don't need them all in frame simultaneously. So it's no problem to have one actor play 3 parts. And you sometimes forget that's a skill, right? It's like this was deliberately someone thought, we're going to do it. This is how we're going to compose the scene. This is how to shoot it. This is we're going to frame it. So that I always found interesting, or at least when I was rewatching it, I thought, oh, this is clever how they put this together.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing that stood out to me when I was watching it, when Eddie Murphy is sitting in the chair and you see the old Jewish guy behind him, and you can totally tell it's a stand-in because he looks nothing like when Eddie Murphy's playing him up close, nothing like it. And maybe because it's, I don't know, just in high res, or something like that I noticed it. But that scene when they're talking about the boxing, I was laughing the whole time. And he's like, every time we talk about boxing, white man's got to pull Rocky Marciano at the
Yeah.
And the guy's like, he kicked Joe Lewis's ass. He's like, Joe Louis was 76 years old when they fought. Because he just has to prove his point that Joe Louis was the best. He goes like, Joe Louis always lying about his age. You know how old he was? 137 years old. Just like, it's just so ridiculously over the top to make their point. And then Akeem comes in and sits down to get a haircut. He just cuts off his rat tail. That'd be $8.
Yeah.
The whole thing's so silly. So 2 other quick scenes that happened right after that just made me laugh was when they go to the bar looking for his bride.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I just laughed and laughed at this sort of parade of like neurotic and crazy women that are in New York, and especially the one that's just like the kind of big woman. And she's like, some guys go an hour and a half. Man's got to put in overtime to get me off. Just like, oh my goodness, it's scary. And then the scene, I just laughed, was at the Black Awareness rally.
Yes.
The guy's like, you know him as Joe the policeman from the What's Going Down episode of That's My Mama. And it's Randy Watson. And it's Eddie Murphy basically, I guess, making him look like Rick James kind of thing.
Yeah, I would think so.
And then he sings The Greatest Love of All by Whitney Houston. And the guy that I like in this scene, though, is the little guy played by Clint James. He's like, oh, that boy is good. That boy can sing. And everyone else hates him. Everyone else is silent. And Clint Smith, he didn't really do anything else. He did that part. And I loved him so much in that part. He was in Airplane 2, the sequel.
I was going to say, I never recognized him from anywhere other than this. And I always felt like I was supposed to know him from somewhere.
Well, like I said,
I always felt like I was missing the joke.
Yeah, he had a small part in Airplane 2, the sequel. He was the guy that, have you seen Airplane 2, the sequel?
I believe I saw it. That's one where the plane goes in outer space, right?
Yeah, it's the lunar shuttle. He was the scalper that was selling the lunar shuttle tickets. He's like, lunar shuttle tickets, by the aisle, by the window. Anyway, so then Randy Watson gets done singing, and he's like, my band, Sexual Chocolate.
Sexual Chocolate.
Sexual Chocolate. And nobody is clapping. I'm laughing away. My wife just looks at me like I'm crazy. And she basically is just like, she's like, what is this? This movie sucks. And she gets up and she walks out and she just doesn't say a word, just goes to bed. So I'm like, okay. She just, I don't know. Maybe I married the wrong woman. I don't know. Don't tell her. You know, man, she just got to loosen up and let her soul glow. Just let your soul glow, baby. So they pass around the collection plate, and Arsenio is like the barbershop guy, and he puts his chicken bone in, and his friends all start yelling at him.
Yeah, that's a collection plate.
Yeah, and I was laughing at the whole thing. Oh man, my wife hated that scene. So the big thing I think about this movie too is that this movie didn't really achieve the success that Eddie Murphy's earlier movies did. Critics didn't like it. I think mostly because it takes Murphy, who's this high energy and raunchy guy, and then tones him down and makes him more likable, like we said, more of an innocent character. But the movie was not as big. It made lots of money that year. I mean, it did well at the box office. It was the number 2 grossing film that year. Behind, if you remember the trivia from last week, the number 1 movie from 1988 was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And this was number 2. Funny enough, the last 3 movies that I've nominated on this podcast were all from 1988.
Yeah, I'm totally shocked.
Yeah, I know.
Shock in my voice.
I know.
If you had said 1998, I would be like beside myself.
But I mean, like, I always do Gen X movies, but it was like big Coming to America and Who Framed Roger Rabbit were the last ones I did. The McDowells obviously made me laugh too.
Love that. Yeah, they have the Big Mac and we have the Big Mick.
Yeah, exactly. We both have 12 beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions. They have sesame seed bun. Our buns have no seeds. Yeah. And then the Samuel L. Jackson scene, just great. And I think that was got to be one of Samuel L. Jackson's first films.
I would think definitely one of his earlier roles. And what I realized when I was watching it, because I love Pulp Fiction so much,
right?
He uses almost identical dialogue in Pulp Fiction when he's got the scene where the guy's tied up to the chair and he's like asking him, like, where's the case? It's, again, the dialogue isn't Shakespeare by any stretch of the imagination. It's, it's just some expletives and some yelling. But I did notice that a few of the lines are the same and in the same order. And I thought I wouldn't be surprised if Tarantino, being the movie fanatic that he is, borrowed from this movie, knowing that Samuel Jackson's character would be in Pulp Fiction. Like, once he had Samuel Jackson signed on, he's like, I'm going to just tweak this scene a little bit.
I think he did, because in the scene here in Coming to America with Louis Anderson, he's like, he calls him Fatso or something like that. And there's a similar scene in the final scene of Pulp Fiction in the restaurant when the robbery is going down, where he drops a line similar to that. So I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, for sure. He's only got Sam Jackson. This movie only has a very small scene, but yeah, it seems that Tarantino borrowed some of the dialogue, and not that that's a bad thing, but coming back to it after seeing Pulp Fiction 50 times, you're like, oh, I've heard those lines before.
Yeah, exactly. And then so they go back to McDowell's house, and he has the party there, and he calls it McDowell's Castle. And it just, that scene struck me as being a little interesting too, because his idea of a castle is basically a little shack for Akeem, right? And it's just that typical American arrogance. Yes. And I like when the Jenks family gets up from the couch and there's the Jerry curl stains. Just let your I thought the dad, man, that dad looks like Smokey Robinson. It wasn't. His name's Arthur Adams. He did some like TV shows like Starsky and Hutch and Sanford and Son, but I was like, man, that guy looks like Smokey Robinson. So then the other thing about the house was when Arsenio was playing the priest.
Oh yeah.
Like when he's like, he helped Daniel get out of the lion's den. He helped Gilligan get off the island. One thing I wanted to mention was like we mentioned how this movie was a bit different, a bit of a departure for Eddie Murphy.
Yes.
And one of the things was the romantic leads, Murphy and Lisa in this, and maybe it was just me, but I felt that they had zero chemistry.
Yeah, I agree.
Which made me think about this. And I think another reason why this movie seems a little bit out of place for Murphy is that up until this point, when this movie came out, he'd never had any romantic interests in his movies. Not in 48 Hours, not in Beverly Hills Cop, not in Trading Places. This was the first movie that he had a romantic interest. And it didn't really work. And it's kind of interesting because it's an integral part of the plot,
Yeah.
like, again, it's not Murphy's typical kind of film role, at least at the time when it came out.
No, I agree. And the woman who played Lisa, I had never seen her before this movie, and I don't think I've seen her since this movie. Whether or not that had anything to do with the lack of chemistry, I don't know. But I don't know. Maybe I just always felt, even as a younger person, that she was miscast for the role. Probably from what you're saying, like it didn't really feel like they had chemistry. And maybe if someone else had been cast in that role, it might have worked a little better.
Interesting, because I'm watching it again last night, and I'm thinking, like, I liked her performance. I thought she was very likable. I thought she came off as very charismatic, and I think in a lot of the romantic scenes, she was really trying. I could see, but there was just no chemistry between the two leads. But I don't think it was, a lack of trying on her part. So one thing I got to mention is when they're walking down the Hudson River, and Don Amici and Ralph Bellamy cameo as the Dukes.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is just so great. We're back, and we mentioned on this podcast before how John Landis, he likes to incorporate elements of his past movies into his subsequent films, like Twilight Zone. They mention Animal House, and he's got this other recurring gag where he puts a "See You Next Wednesday" movie poster in almost all of his movies.
Yes.
Like it's obviously not a real movie, it's a joke. I'm assuming it's a play on "See You Next Tuesday," which we don't need to get into for obvious reasons. But
I know he also does that in the Thriller music video, Michael Jackson.
He's in there as well.
To that as well, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
sorry, where was the reference in this movie? I didn't catch it.
So when Akeem goes into the subway to chase after Lisa, it's a huge movie poster on the inside of the subway, and it also, if you look closely, I noticed, again, maybe because it was in high def, it says starring Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh, nice.
Which I thought was interesting, tying back to Trading Places. Nice. So the king comes to America to get Akeem and Semi, because Semi wires him and asks him for $1 million.
Why not ask for a cool meal?
Yeah. And the scene when they go to the Mighty Sharp barbershop, and the king is wearing this lion skin pelt, and the old Jewish guy feels it. He's like, "What is that? Real velvet?" I just laughed at it. It was so funny. And then I love the whole subplot that's going on with Arsenio Hall and the sister. Yeah. And he tells her that he's the prince and Murphy's the servant. And I love how she leaves the room and she says to Arsenio, she's like, "Your secret's safe with me, Your Highness." And she looks at Murphy. She's like, "Bye." I don't know. I just laughed and I just thought it was funny. And everyone looks at the sister and she's like, "Akeem's not the prince. He's the prince." And points at Arsenio. And the king's like, "Who told you that?" and Arsenio just kind of shrinks away. That made me laugh out loud. Like just his reaction to that. And then,
but now, let me ask you this. Yeah. Did it surprise you that the daughter was like that when her dad is basically like that too?
The sister, you mean?
Yeah, like the sister wanting to be with the prince and sort of looking down on the servant. Like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's exactly how her dad treats people. You're rich, you're famous, you're wealthy, you're in power. I'm going to love you. Oh, you're just the guy who mops up the puke. I'm going to look down on you and just, not necessarily treat you like garbage, but I'm not going to treat you like I treat everybody else. And essentially the sister demonstrated that that's the lesson she's learned from her father, because you see her do this too.
Well, absolutely. But I think it's maybe even a little bit more than that, because she's also a little bit sort of, I don't know, sex crazy, or guy crazy. Because remember when Daryl comes into her room out of the rain?
At the end. And then he looks at the camera.
Like, he breaks the fourth wall too, right? They do it more than once in this movie, because she's like, "The first thing we need to do is get you out of these wet clothes." Just let yourself, baby. He just looks at the camera. So again, pretty funny. One other thing that I don't know if you're aware of this, but this movie was involved in a lawsuit with Art Buchwald. He sued Paramount because he said that he had the idea for this movie. He had written a treatment called King for a Day, and he claimed that Eddie Murphy stole his idea, and he actually won his lawsuit. Paramount had to settle with him.
I was going to say, was it a win, or did they come to terms before a judgment could be made? Because that happens a lot. So that nobody has to admit guilt, and then you sign an NDA and you never hear the details.
I'm pretty sure he won the lawsuit and Paramount had to settle.
Yeah, I knew there was money exchanged. I just didn't know the specifics of it. And from what I understand, they're in the process of making a sequel. So obviously whatever agreement was reached included all future rights to any sort of spin-offs, remakes, reimagining, sequels, or anything of that nature. Because I can't imagine they're going to put a Coming to America 2 together only to risk being sued again.
That's a good point. Interesting. This movie also got some criticism from the Black community when it came out for its portrayal of Black life in Africa. I think it also got a bit of praise, and rightly so, because if you think about it, and you mentioned this before, that this was pretty much the first Eddie Murphy movie that was almost exclusively about Black people.
Yes.
If you don't count the Dukes, there's only 3 speaking parts for white people in this movie. There's the cabbie, the telegram lady that you mentioned, and Louis Anderson. But
yeah,
up until when this movie came out, Eddie Murphy's movies were pretty much all about him. He was always like the smartest guy in the room.
And a fish out of water, right?
Yeah.
It was always, he was the only person of color in
surrounded by white people.
Every movie that he was in. Yeah. But he always brought to that, like you said, smartest guy in the room. He's Beverly Hills Cop. He goes to Beverly Hills as the only person of color into Beverly Hills where it's super white. And what do you know? He's the best detective. He's the only guy who can solve the case. The other guys all have their fingers up their butt and they can't do it. Or, with 48 hours, they literally have to get him out of jail because the other cop can't do it without his help. So, it had always put him in that fish out of water idea, but he always had the upper hand where I'm not the fish out of water and I'm being made fun of or being put down because I'm different. It's I'm bringing something to this equation that you didn't have until you brought me in.
And right after this, too, then he made Harlem Nights and Boomerang, which both featured prominently Black casts as well. So again, this movie changed his career in a lot of different ways, because then he went on to focus more on African-American issues with more of African-American cast members.
Yeah. And
then, like I said, it led him into more multiple character movies and more family-friendly movies. So if you think about it, too, it's in a lot of ways, this movie is kind of a metaphor for Eddie Murphy and his career. Because he was like this prince, this Hollywood royalty who has this lavish lifestyle. He gets whatever he wants. Everybody loves the guy. But then he wants to do his own thing. But in the process, I think he kind of got a chance to see what the outside world is kind of really like. And he wants to go back to, what he knows best and what people expect from him. Mm-hmm. Interesting. This wasn't just a transitional movie for Eddie Murphy. It was also pretty transitional for John Landis, too. This was pretty much the end of his run as a successful Hollywood director. But he did go through a rough part even before this. If you think about the things that happened with Twilight Zone and stuff like that, his career was in a lot of trouble as a director. Mm-hmm. And but this pretty much marked the end of it. I would say this was it. I mean, he hasn't directed a film in over 20 years. And if you think about it, he brought us Animal House, Blues Brothers, American Werewolf in London, Trading Places, Spies Like Us, and then he just dropped off the map.
Yeah, I'm looking at his IMDb here, and although he has a lot of director credits after 1988, I don't recognize any of these. It was a lot of
crap. He did The Stupids and stuff. And now Eddie Murphy and him did kind of mend their fences because Eddie Murphy brought him back as a director for Beverly Hills Cop Part 3, but the movie didn't do very well. It wasn't very well received. So John Landis just lost it. I really think, I don't know. I wouldn't say that it was what happened on Twilight Zone that ruined his career, because he was able to come back with this movie and it was, really successful. It was really, really good. But then after this, that was it. He made a couple of dumb Blues Brothers 2000. God, awful. But like I say, I believe that this movie kind of marked the end of the comedy era in Hollywood. From the 70s and 80s, when there was all these comedies, usually mostly R-rated comedies. But after this, they basically stopped making movies like this anymore. They've made comedies since, obviously, but mostly they suck. and I think that there was a shift to try to get more people in the seats. So the R-rated comedy basically went the way of the dinosaur.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, you got to think of the timing too, right? Like in the late 80s and early 90s, especially the early 90s, you have things like grunge music where the attitudes of that younger demographic are changing considerably. And the kinds of things that appeal to a young person in the 80s is not necessarily now the same thing that's appealing to the next generation of young people in the 90s. And that's always going to happen. There's always going to be change. And I think that the people that make movies realize that this new generation, this 90s slacker generation, that comes with the whole grunge movement, this isn't the kind of thing they were interested in. And you have a real shift in the kind of movies that get made. You get things like Reality Bites and Empire Records and Singles, where it's more about this this sort of slacker idea, this woe is me, and all about the music and the independent films and things like that, which is a great departure from what you had in the mid to late 80s.
That's a really good point, because the 90s were all about independent films, and the comedy genre just kind of fizzled out. It probably wasn't until Judd Apatow came along, like about 15 years later, where there was that resurgence of those kind of R-rated raunchy comedies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, we did American Pie, which I want to say came out in around 99.
Yeah.
And so like that's over 10 years later. And even that was sort of, you could say, sort of the precursor to what was to come in the next few years. But yeah, you had a very long hiatus where you were not seeing these kinds of comedies anymore. There just wasn't an audience for it.
Like I say, I think Coming to America was kind of the end. It marked the end of the classic comedy. And in my mind, there's really only been 2 comedies, maybe 3, that have kind of had that spirit that these classic comedies had, not counting Judd Apatow's movies. The movies that I think most resemble the comedies of the 70s and 80s, like I say, there's 2 of them, maybe 3. Private Parts from 1997. It's the Howard Stern movie. Yeah, it's directed by Betty Thomas.
Yep.
That one embodies this. And
so good.
Also The School of Rock from 2003 with Jack Black. Even though it wasn't...
I disagree with you on that one.
It wasn't an R-rated comedy, but I think it had the spirit and the formula of these old comedies. The other one, too, was also from 97, was Liar Liar with Jim Carrey. I'm not a big Jim Carrey fan. I really don't like his movies. But that one I thought had the same kind of spirit of these kind of comedies. But like a lot of these comedies from this era, this movie had a lot of really good quotes. I thought at the beginning when the king and the queen are talking about love, and the king says, "There's a fine line between love and nausea." I laughed at that, and I love when they're jousting with those big sticks at the beginning, Arsenio and Eddie Murphy, and Arsenio says, he calls them, "You sweat from a baboon's." Yeah. Where did that come from? And I actually really like the line when he says, Eddie Murphy says, "It's also a tradition that times must and always do change, my friend."
Yeah.
I thought that was really good. And of course, I love the scene at the basketball game when the guy comes out and he's like, "I will cherish this experience for the rest of my life." And they're like, "Who's that?" "Oh, just a man I met in the restroom." And then you mentioned when the credits roll, there's like a sequence where they show clips of the characters and the actors who played the roles. And then it stops and it goes back to Saul, the Jewish man.
Yes.
In the barbershop. And I for some reason, I just kept the credits going and I watched and I remember seeing that again. And he's so stupid, but I laughed because he's telling the joke about the soup.
Yeah.
"Oh, just taste the soup." The guy says, "I don't want to taste the soup. I just taste the soup." "Okay, I'll taste the soup. Where's the spoon?" What do you know from funny? I'm like, because I think I remember too, around that time I worked at a restaurant and the owner was an old Macedonian man who used to come in and tell us jokes that made no sense. We never there was like no punchline. It was just like that joke about the soup. "Where's the spoon?" What do you know? Like,
so in a reversal of fortune, he was the coat. He was the cringiest of all time.
Of all time, to bring it full circle. So you enjoyed watching the movie after all these years? I certainly did.
Yeah, it was good. I would say probably a solid B, maybe a B minus. Like there were certainly, I think because of my familiarity with it, I'm probably grading it a little harder than I might if it was something I'd never seen before. I think I probably would give it a slightly higher grade. Definitely would recommend it to people who haven't seen it. Definitely would have no problem rewatching it. But yeah, I'm thinking probably like 7.5 out of 10, like maybe a B or a B minus.
Yeah, I think I'd rate it right around the same. It's funny because John Landis used to always say that he felt that this movie needed to be recut a little bit. It was a little bit too long and it was a little too slow in places. And I thought, oh, man, he's crazy. But watching it now, and maybe it's just through the lens of today with movies as they are, with, all the action and so much in it, I guess I can kind of see where he was, kind of coming from. Mm-hmm. There's just a couple times where it's a little slow in places. So I think I would fall right around where you said, around 7.5 for this. Yeah. But I enjoyed it. I laughed. And even though I knew the jokes were coming, it had been so seen them that there was quite a few times that I found myself just laughing out loud and really enjoying it. You mentioned about a sequel for this.
So
I've heard one is in the works. Is that true?
Exactly. I hear that it is being made right now. Yuck. So, I guess probably not right now, but I mean, it's probably on hold. But I'm kind of curious. I haven't read anything about it. I don't know anything about what it is, but I suspect it'll be a next generation style story because they're calling it Coming to America. Probably just Coming to America Part 2. I'm sure it has a subtitle, but I suspect it'll be sort of a next generation tale. And I'm thinking, well, how do you retell this story in a way that it makes it worth retelling? Like, we already know the first story. What are you going to do differently that might make it a little more interesting? And I think for me, the only one of the things that would make it a little more interesting to me is do the gender swap. So the person coming to America is a young lady instead of a young man. I think that's sort of the standard when you're going to remake a movie these days. If it's a movie that used to star a whole bunch of old white men, now it's time to put some ladies in the driver's seat. And I'm thinking, what if it was a gay woman who comes to America? Maybe in the back in the country, Zamunda, for whatever reason, she can't be herself because she's supposed to marry a man and have a child and all the rest of that. And as someone who's gay, she doesn't feel comfortable admitting this to herself and coming out to her friends and family. So she comes to America to, find out who she really is. And again, you're trying to find a partner. And in this case, the partner is a woman looking for a woman. And that's the sort of aha moment of this movie. I think that could work. Of course, when you're going, if that's the direction, it's going to be a very fine line with comedy. You got to make sure you're not pointing and saying, haha, it's funny because they're gay, because, that's not cool. But I think that there's definitely room for an interesting story. And again, that would give us a new tale to tell, but sort of use the formula we saw in the first one and show us something different. It's not just child doesn't want to be in the arranged marriage, comes to America, finds a spouse, done. So I saw that movie already. Give me something different. Give me a reason to go and pay money to see this. So that's just off the top of my head. What about you? If they in this sequel, what do you think they might do differently?
So of course I'm going to be the curmudgeon. I'm going to say that they shouldn't do a sequel.
Well, I'm going to agree with you on that one, and I reserve judgment, but I think you're probably right. Maybe Eddie Murphy is a widower now, and his wife has passed. Who knows?
But what you're talking about is a completely different movie, right? And not that I'm discrediting. I actually think what you're saying has some merit to it. But that's a totally different movie. So then just make an original new movie and call it something else. And don't tie it to this. Don't tie it to the Coming to America. The Coming to America, the cool thing with it is it's a very tidy story. Mm-hmm. He starts out, he doesn't want to marry this woman. He's never met her before. He wants to fall in love and meet his own, wife. So he comes to America, he finds his bride, he goes back and he marries her, and it's done. The movie's over. Like, the only reason to make it at this point is try and make money. And I don't know. I just don't think they should do it. That's my thought.
Yeah, I would think whatever the sequel is about, you've got to keep in mind that in today's day and age, social media is everywhere. People have cameras on their phones. There's no secrecy at all. We even saw it in the first one where he's standing in line at the basketball game. Somebody who recognizes him from his home country stops and, my prince is a Great Day my whole life. Like, think of how that would work in the era of social media. It just takes one person to recognize you, click, internet, hashtag, and now everybody knows. Mm-hmm. So the whole concept of
get a selfie with them,
Yeah, the concept of the first one where he tells his parents one thing, but he comes to America with a different agenda, and they don't necessarily know what he's been doing. That wouldn't work. There's no way that someone who is royalty in this foreign country could come to America that's got so many people, so many cameras, and keep that a secret. So I think that whatever the story is going to be about, they really need to make sure that it doesn't involve this level of secrecy that could easily be undone with one selfie. Like that just seems like a tremendous oversight.
Yeah, I would not want to be working on the script for the sequel. That's for sure.
Yeah, no kidding.
No. Okay, on that note, let's have some
Fun with Caveman.
Okay, since I nominated this film, Derek, it's over to you. What do you have for us this week to have some fun?
All right. So this trivia segment might be a little long because I've got a lot of stuff I want to run past you,
Sure.
but it's going to go in a few different directions.
Oh, let's have some fun.
The greater theme is actors that like to play multiple parts in the same movie. So we already talked about that. Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall both do multiple roles in this movie. And so what I'm going to ask you is I'm going to give you the name of the performer. I'm going to tell you what movie they're in. And I just want you to tell me how many different roles they played. And if you can tell me the names of some or all or any of the characters, that's bonus. And to start it off, we're going to go with Eddie Murphy. I've got a list of 7 movies he's done where he plays multiple characters.
All right.
And I'm going to make this real easy. The first one on the list is Coming to America. How many different characters does he play?
How many characters does he play in this? So he plays Akeem, he plays Saul, and he plays the barber from Mighty Sharp. So at least 3. I'll say 3.
You missed one. He plays 4 characters. The 4th character is Randy Watson.
Oh, of course, Randy Watson. I mentioned it. Yep.
All right.
Go figure.
Okay. So the next one, these are all going to be Eddie Murphy for a bit.
Okay.
Eddie Murphy, the movie was Vampire in Brooklyn. How many different roles do you think he played?
Oh, God. I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know. So I would just be guessing at it, and I will say he played 4.
He played 3.
I should have
If you haven't seen it, I won't ask you to name any of the characters.
Nope. Never saw the movie.
Right. Okay. This one I think you have seen. Eddie Murphy in the movie Bowfinger.
Oh, I do remember seeing Bowfinger. I think he played... Did he play himself and then somebody else who looked like him? So I'll just say 2.
That's right, 2. He played brother Hit Ramsey and Jiff Ramsey.
Okay.
All right. Next Eddie Murphy movie on the list is Norbit, the movie that cost Eddie Murphy an Oscar. Norbit. How many different roles did he play?
He played... Again, I have not seen it, but he played himself. He played his character, and then he played like a big overweight woman. So I will say he must have did another one. I'll say he did 3.
He did 3. You got
yes.
him right. Yeah.
Yes.
And I saw
Total
Norbit.
guess.
It was terrible. But in the Norbit trailer, there is a scene where Eddie Murphy in the makeup as the really large woman goes to a water park, and she's wearing a bikini. And when she's coming into the water park in the bikini, and I want to say it's Tom Hanks' son. Colin Hanks is the guy at the gate. And he stops her and he goes, "Are you wearing bottoms under there?" Because her belly hangs so low. And she lifts up her gut. "Of course I'm wearing bottoms." And in my house now, whenever somebody's running around, and you're like, "Are you wearing bottoms?" That's the instinctual response. Of course I'm wearing bottoms. Whether you are or whether you're not, that's just the appropriate line to that question. All right, back to the trivia.
Okay.
Eddie Murphy did a movie called Meet Dave.
Okay.
How many roles did he play?
I don't know. I will say he did 2.
He did 2.
Oh,
I
geez,
haven't
that's
seen
total
Meet-
guess.
I want to say Meet Dave is one where he's like an alien inside, like a little alien inside a robot that's the size of a person.
Okay.
And so I think he's the little alien and the person. So yeah, he played 2 roles, Dave and the captain.
Nice.
All right, this is getting into a little more familiar territory. Got 2 more for Eddie Murphy. He did The Nutty Professor and Nutty Professor to The Clumps. In the first Nutty Professor, how many different roles did Eddie Murphy play?
Oh, goodness. So it's been so long since so he played the professor. It was Professor Clump, right?
Yes.
And then was it the thin guy was like Buddy?
Yep.
I can't remember. And then
Buddy Love.
Buddy Love. That was it. And then he played the mom and the dad and I think the grandma. So I'll say 5.
He played 7.
Oh, jeez. Well, who did I miss? Did
So
he get
he-
was I right on those ones?
Yeah, you're all right on those ones. He also played a character called Lance Perkins. I don't remember. And at the dinner table, he also played the brother, Ernie Klump.
Oh, he was the brother too. That's right. Oh,
He was the
yes.
mom, the dad, the grandma, and the brother, and himself. So he was
Yes.
5 of the people around the dinner table. Yep. All right. And then in the sequel, and I guess this really comes down to you. Do you think he played more characters, less characters, or the same characters? I'll give you a hint. He played most of the same characters. So did he play fewer, more, or the same?
I will say he played the same.
He played one additional character.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's sort of a trick question with that one because he plays the dad, but the dad in the movie becomes younger. He drinks the magic potion.
Oh, okay.
So he's credited as both the old father and the young father, which technically same guy. So I'll give you that one if you said the same.
Okay.
All right. Another actor that liked to do this a lot was Mel Brooks.
Yes, he did.
I'm
You're
ask
right.
you 3 Mel Brooks performances. You got to tell me how many different characters he played. And this is more in your wheelhouse. So I kind of expect you to get the answers right and be able to tell me the answers of who he played.
Yeah. Oh, my
Okay,
goodness.
we're going to start. We're going to start with the 2 movies that you've already reviewed on this podcast.
Okay.
Spaceballs. How many characters does Mel Brooks
Spaceballs,
play?
he was the president, and he was Yogurt, and I think that was it. So I'll say 2.
Full marks, Chris. Yep.
Oh, yes,
2.
I got it
Those
right.
are the 2. President Scrooge.
I was trying to think if there was another one in there, too, or not. Okay.
Blazing Saddles.
Well, he was William J. Lepedimane, and he was the Indian chief that pulls over
Yes.
the wagon train.
Yes. Indian Chief. Yes.
So that was it, though. That was just the 2.
That was it. You're right, too. You got them both. Good job.
Oh, yes.
All right. This is where we're gonna stretch it here. History of the World Part 1.
Oh, no, he played lots of parts in there.
He did play lots of
my
parts. How
goodness.
many?
Oh, geez. He was, what was the guy's name? Comicus?
Yes.
And,
Stand-up philosopher.
yeah, the stand-up philosopher. He was Torquemada. Hey, Torquemada, what do you say? And he was the king.
Yep.
And
It's good to be king.
And he was the piss boy. So I will say he was 4.
He was also Moses.
Oh, he was Moses.
I have 15
15. No, 10. 10 commandments for all to obey. Oh, of course. Oh,
He did 5.
got
This one
that.
there.
Oh, so
Right.
good.
All right. I'm just going to pick a couple more here for you.
That
Okay,
was
here
a
we
good
go.
one.
John Cleese in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Not sure if you're a big Monty Python fan, but
Oh, I like Monty Python. They're great.
the Monty Python's troupe always played multiple roles. There was no hesitation in that regard. John
Absolutely,
Cleese,
yeah.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail. How many characters do you think he played, and how many of them can you name?
Oh God, he was Sir Lancelot,
Was?
and what else did he do in that? Was he the Black Knight?
Was?
Wasn't he one of the poor people?
He was peasant number 3.
Okay, I'll take it.
King of the
Yeah. Oh God, was he the Enchanter?
He was.
Yes.
Enchanter. Nicely done.
Oh, I really like that movie a lot. I'm trying to think. I'll say that's it. So what is that? 4? I'll go with that.
Would be wrong. You missed 2 of them.
Oh,
Like
who did I
6
miss?
He was second Swallow Savvy Guard
Okay.
and taunting French Guard.
Okay.
I guess on top of the, we already got one. All right, and I'll give you a nice easy one to end these off with.
All right.
This came up in conversation, I think, during last week's episode, or the week. Yeah, it was last week's episode. Peter Sellers in Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
Oh,
How many
God,
roles
he
did
was
he
so
play,
good.
and can you name the characters?
So he was the president, Merkin Muffley. We mentioned that he
Yes.
was Dr. Strangelove. And he was Mandrake, too, I think.
yes,
So,
Lionel Mandrake.
3?
Yes.
Is that right? 3?
That's it. 3, you got it.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew I had to give you a nice, easy, right over the plate for the end.
Exactly, to finish that one off.
You're pretty good.
Not
Yeah.
bad.
Nicely done.
Some of them were pretty tough, though, man. Okay, so before we move on, our next show, it's over to you for your movie pick.
It is indeed.
So do you have a movie teed
I
up
do.
that you'd like me to
Yes.
watch for
Yes,
next
I do.
episode? And if
Yep.
so, what is it?
It is the 1998 Steven Soderbergh film Out of Sight, starring George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. Have you seen it before?
Out of Sight? No, I have not seen it. I don't even think I've heard of it.
It's good. I really enjoyed it. I knew I was going to give this one to you, so I watched it again recently. George Clooney, Jennifer Lopez, Ving Rhames, Don Cheadle, Dennis Farina, Albert Brooks, Luis Guzman. It's got a big cast.
Jennifer Lopez is in it, and it's a good movie?
It's a fantastic movie.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite good, and it has that nonlinear storytelling technique that we talked about a couple
yes.
episodes back as well, which I really love and I think was done to great effect. And Soderbergh, like, he knows how to make a movie. And this is one of his early collaborations with Clooney. Obviously, they wanted on to do all the Oceans 11, 12, and 13 movies. So I really hope you enjoy it, but I won't be surprised if you don't. We'll come back next week. We'll talk about it, and I'll tell you all the reasons why you should like it that you don't.
And Soderbergh also did Traffic and Sex, Lies, and Videotape too, right?
Yeah, he's got
he's a really good
incredible
director.
resume. Yeah.
Well, this will be interesting. I'm glad. Like I say, I'm not even really familiar with that movie at all. Well, it came out after the 80s, so of course I would never have heard of it.
Yeah. I don't want to really tell you much about it.
Right.
It's not like Memento where it's like, don't look anything up.
Right.
But,
yeah.
Again, I find with a lot of these movies, the less you know going in, the more likely you are to enjoy it, because you can sometimes get a little bit of that wow factor where you're like, oh, I didn't realize that's where this movie was going.
No, that makes sense. Okay, so I'll watch Out of Sight, and we'll come back next week, and we'll review that one. And if you want to reach out to us, like we mentioned at the top of the show, on Twitter, you will get Derek at Amaron_DM, and you'll find me on Twitter at CMcBrien, and that's IEN. And, of course, PopGoesYourWorld.com is our website with all of our contact information. Until next time, this is Chris McBrien for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.